Deep in the Vietnam jungle, an elite squad vanished without a trace during a secret mission. Their last radio call sent chills through command, then silence. What happened to the ghost squad? The truth is stranger and darker than anyone could imagine. In the thick, humid jungles of Vietnam, time has a strange way of standing still. Even today, villagers speak in hushed voices about the things they saw, or think they saw, during the war. The war ended decades ago, but the jungle hasn't forgotten. Neither have the people. Deep in the Central Highlands, stories continue to pass from one generation to the next. They speak of a group of American soldiers who vanished without a trace. No graves, no bodies, no official report that ever made sense. Just silence and whisper. The locals call them the ghost soldiers. Some say they were part of a secret mission that went wrong. Others believe they never left the jungle. There are tales of distant footsteps at night, of flashlights flickering in areas where no one dares to walk. One old woman swore she saw figures in American uniforms standing just beyond the trees, watching her village in complete silence. When she approached, they vanished. No sound, no footprints, just the thick mist hanging in the air. Among the veterans who served during the Vietnam War, the rumors are even stranger. A few say they heard about a unit that went too deep into enemy territory and never returned. Not captured, not killed, just gone. Their names were never listed publicly. No ceremonies were held. Even their families were told to stop asking questions. When a former radio operator named Jack Lennox spoke up at a reunion in 1993, he said something that made the room go quiet. "I picked up a faint transmission one night back in '69, he said. They were whispering, calm and steady, giving coordinates. It sounded like Americans, but the place they were calling from had already been marked as lost. When asked if it could have been a mistake, Jack shook his head slowly. You don't forget voices like that. What makes the mystery even more unsettling is how little shows up in the records. Freedom of Information Act requests in the 1990s revealed a few heavily redacted documents, pages blacked out except for a few words: recon team, no recovery, asset compromised, nothing else. No names, no mission title. It was as if the team had never existed, but people kept talking, and the stories kept spreading. In 2004, a group of American hikers exploring the edges of an old combat zone near the Laos border claimed they stumbled across rusted equipment tangled in the roots of banyan trees. A torn piece of fabric, faded, but with part of a U flag still visible, was found near a collapsed bamboo structure. They didn't know what they had discovered, but one of the guides, a local man in his 60s, went pale when he saw it. He told the group to leave immediately. This is where the ghosts live, he said. They don't want to be found. At first glance, these might seem like nothing more than stories, tales twisted by time and memory. But if you listen closely, there's a pattern, a timeline, a shadow trail. The more you look, the clearer it becomes that something happened out there, something real. These weren't made-up ghosts or campfire stories. They were men, soldiers, and someone wanted their story buried deep. But not everyone let it stay that way. Over the years, fragments of their story began to surface. Letters that never reached home, an old compass etched with initials, a journal torn and burned around the edges, yet still readable. Bit by bit, the pieces started to form a picture. A secret squad sent into the jungle, with orders no one would speak about. A mission too dangerous to be recorded. A disappearance that left behind questions no one could answer. This is the story of those men. The ones who were erased from the books but not from the memories of those who served beside them, or the people who saw them long after they were gone. It's a story of courage, silence, and sacrifice. And finally, after decades of mystery, it's time their voices were heard. Because some ghosts don't haunt the jungle, they protect it. They were never supposed to be known. No medals, no records, no return. Officially, they were Recon Unit Echo 7, but among the few who had even heard of them, they were called something else, the Ghost Squad. Not because they vanished, at least not at first, but because of how they moved. Silent, precise, always just ahead of the enemy, slipping through jungle shadows like they were part of the trees themselves. They were the unit that others only heard about through rumor or whispers passed around fires after a long patrol. No one really knew where they came from, or where they went. Their formation began quietly in early 1968, at a time when the war in Vietnam was shifting into something darker and more uncertain. Intelligence suggested that supply lines along the Ho Chi Minh Trail were growing stronger. Weapons were coming in faster. Something had to be done, but it couldn't be done publicly. This wasn't a mission for a large force. It had to be surgical, silent, deniable. 6 names were chosen, 6 individuals from different parts of the country, each one pulled from a different unit without explanation. Their families received vague letters. Your son has been reassigned to a classified post. Some families never heard anything at all, just a sudden silence. The team leader was Captain Franklin Voss, a former schoolteacher from Wisconsin who had already earned a quiet reputation for leading search and rescue missions far outside the wire. Voss wasn't the loud type. He listened more than he spoke, but when he gave an order, no one questioned it. He believed in clear plans and trusted instincts. Some said he could read terrain like others read maps. His second in command was Sergeant Leo Calder, a demolitions expert from Detroit with a background in construction before he enlisted. Calder could rig anything, bridges, bunkers, even enemy transport routes, with nothing but scrap and patience. But he wasn't reckless. He understood what destruction really meant, and he never smiled when he lit a fuse. Corporal Thomas Yazzie, the team's scout, had grown up in the high desert lands of Arizona, a Navajo tracker with eyes that could spot broken branches in places others saw only brush. Yazzie was quiet, almost invisible in the jungle. He rarely spoke unless it mattered, but when he did, people listened. Specialist Carl Novak handled long-range fire. Born in rural Pennsylvania, Novak was the son of a hunter and learned early how to steady his breath and pull a trigger without blinking. He didn't talk much about his past, but he carried a small folded photo in his pocket at all times, a picture of his sister smiling by a lake. The medic, Lieutenant Anna Moreno, was a young Army nurse from San Diego who volunteered for field duty after her older brother was listed missing in action. She was calm under pressure, sharp-minded, and carried a notebook where she wrote about every mission, every wound, every strange feeling she couldn't explain. She never shared what was in it. And then there was Sergeant James Rourke, the communications specialist. Raised in New Jersey, Rourke had once been a jazz musician. He liked solving puzzles, finding patterns in noise. His job was to make sure they stayed connected without being found. He could bounce signals off clouds if he had to, but his real gift was listening. He picked up whispers in the static that others would miss. Together, these 6 formed Echo 7. They trained in complete isolation, away from regular forces. No insignia, no unit patches, no photographs. Their gear was unmarked. Even their voices were never recorded. What they learned was unlike anything in the usual training manuals. They practiced crossing rivers at night without sound, learned to build traps from jungle vines, and trained for weeks to go without resupply. They became shadows long before they were sent into the real jungle. Their mission was never about direct fighting. Echo 7 was built for deep reconnaissance, silent sabotage, and disrupting enemy supply routes before anyone knew they were there. They moved far beyond the safe zones, deep into areas marked red on maps, places even locals avoided. Sometimes they'd plant false evidence to confuse the enemy. Other times, they'd gather intel from hidden observation points, reporting movements that helped save entire battalions from ambush. But what set them apart wasn't just their skills, it was their ability to disappear, to blend into the environment so completely that not even friendly units could find them without a prearranged signal. They didn't leave footprints, they didn't speak unless necessary, and they never left anything behind. No one outside their small circle ever knew where they were going or when they'd be back. Even when they returned to temporary safe houses, they stayed hidden, speaking only to a handful of handlers, and each time, they went back out again, deeper, quieter, further from home. As the months passed, their legend began to grow, not in public, but in corners of base camps, among troops who thought they saw something move in the trees. A single flash of a camouflaged face, a message, left behind, warning of a trap just minutes before a patrol walked into it. Some said they were ghosts, others said they were just stories made up by tired soldiers trying to explain what they couldn't understand. But they were real. They were the Ghost Squad. And in the late summer of 1969, Echo 7 was sent on a mission deeper than any before, a mission that would push every skill they had to the limit, a mission they would never return from. Or so the world was told. By late summer of 1969, the war had entered one of its most complicated phases. Intelligence reports hinted at something bigger brewing in the dense borderlands between Vietnam and Laos, areas marked in red, where few American forces dared to go. Deep within that green hell, the North Vietnamese army had grown more organized, more hidden, supply trails twisted like veins through thick jungle, feeding the fight from places just beyond the edge of maps. American command needed eyes inside. But not just eyes, they needed shadows. Echo 7, the Ghost Squad, had already completed 8 classified operations with precision and silence. But this 9th mission was different. It wasn't just reconnaissance anymore. It wasn't just sabotage. It was interception, capture, discovery. The order came through on an overcast morning at their hidden jungle outpost. No briefings, no discussion, just a sealed message hand-delivered by a quiet man with no insignia. Their objective was chillingly simple: intercept and secure a high-ranking North Vietnamese courier convoy, rumored to be carrying documents detailing Soviet arms transfers and the presence of foreign advisors, information so sensitive that even top generals were kept out of the loop. The mission was tied to a broader shadow campaign along the border, one that would later be known, at least in whispers, as part of Operation Prairie Fire, an operation involving Mac V. Sog, the most secretive task force in Southeast Asia. But Echo 7 wasn't Mac V at Sog. They worked alongside them, sometimes behind them, in deeper, quieter spaces where no paperwork followed. And now they were going into one of the most dangerous regions in Southeast Asia, with orders not to engage unless absolutely necessary. No backup, no air support, no exit plan. Captain Franklin Voss unfolded the topographic map on the ground as the rest of the team gathered around in silence. The route would take them across 2 rivers, through triple canopy jungle, and into an area known only by its codename, Black Lantern Valley. Few Americans had ever stepped foot there. None had returned. 20 kilometers past safe range, Voss said quietly. We'll move in 5 clicks a night. No fires, no contact. Rourke, keep transmission short. Yazzie, stay sharp. The rest of you pack light. Each member nodded. No one questioned the risk. They had accepted it the moment they joined Echo 7. But this time, something felt different. Even Yazzie, the quiet tracker who rarely spoke unless necessary, hesitated for a moment before checking his gear. Too quiet, he muttered. Even the birds are gone. The weather didn't help. Clouds hung low over the treetops. The air was thick and heavy, and every step forward felt like pushing into something unseen. Rain began to fall steadily by the second day, soaking their packs and fogging their optics. The jungle swallowed sound. It swallowed everything. By nightfall on the 3rd day, they reached the ridge overlooking the valley. From there, through the mist, they spotted faint movement. Lights, trucks, and guards. The convoy was real and heavily protected. They didn't speak out loud, only using hand signals and brief whispers. Moreno scribbled something in her notebook. Too big for a courier team. Looks like a command post. That was the first warning. Voss adjusted the plan. They would wait until the convoy moved again, then intercept it further east where the terrain narrowed. Novak, the sniper, found a perch in the trees. Yazzie marked potential fallback routes. Calder placed low-charge tripwires. Not to kill, but to confuse. Rourke kept scanning frequencies, static, faint signals, then silence. And then, on the 5th day, the final transmission came through. Ghost Squad advancing to Phase 3, Rourke said quietly into the radio. It was the last time anyone heard from them. After that, nothing. For weeks, intelligence teams listened for signs. Planes flew overhead, scanning for signals. Nothing. Even Max VSOG units, which operated in some of the darkest corners of the war, reported no sightings. Recon units combed the general area under the cover of broader operations, but found only abandoned campsites, scorched in places, like someone tried to erase their trail. Command dismissed the incident publicly. No such operation recorded, but in secret some officers pushed to retrieve Echo 7. A few files marked Echo 7 contingency appeared in locked safes. All requests to launch recovery missions were denied. The political cost was too high. Crossing into Laos at that level would risk exposing black operations that weren't meant to exist. So, the story died before it could breathe. The team was marked missing, unconfirmed. Their families received vague letters. Your son was lost during combat operations. No details, no timelines, just silence. But silence doesn't stop questions. Years later, a veteran named Curtis Wills, who once worked in signals intelligence at a covert base near the border, came forward. In a letter to a journalist, he described picking up strange clicks on a secure frequency nearly 3 weeks after Echo 7's last known contact. At first it was dismissed as noise, but Will swore he heard coded taps repeating patterns. I heard Echo 7, holding, no compromise. Then it stopped. No one followed up. Back in the jungles of Laos, locals still tell stories about 6 figures that passed through villages without taking anything. One farmer said he found American rations hidden in a bamboo grove. Another claimed to have seen a woman in foreign clothes treating a wounded child before vanishing into the forest. And then there were the lights flickering deep in the hills, long after the war had ended. Most dismissed these as stories, the kind people tell when the past refuses to rest, but others believe Echo 7 survived for a time. Maybe they were captured, maybe they were hunted, maybe they tried to finish their mission until the very end. What's certain is this: they never gave up their position, they never broke radio silence again, and they never came back. But their story wasn't over. Not yet. Because the truth, long buried under politics, fear, and time, was about to rise again. Days turned into weeks, then weeks into months. Still nothing came from the jungle. No signal, no rescue, no wreckage, no bodies. As far as the official record was concerned, Recon Unit Echo 7 had simply vanished. By late October 1969, the Army quietly closed the file. The operation was labeled inconclusive. Internally, it was classified under a limited access category, one of many forgotten footnotes from the war. The paperwork was dry and cold. Mission outcome unresolved. Personnel listed MIA presumed captured or deceased. Families received the kind of letters that sound comforting on the surface but say nothing underneath. We regret to inform you that your son, Captain Franklin Voss, has been declared missing in action following a classified mission in support of national security objectives. Each letter ended the same way. Further information is not available at this time. No locations, no details, no remains. Even the dog tags often recovered or returned, even in the worst cases, were missing. For families holding on to hope, the silence was unbearable. For others, it was worse than closure. It was like being told to forget someone ever existed. One mother of the fallen, Mrs. Novak, wrote to her congressman every month for 2 years. "Just tell me where my son fell," she pleaded. "I'll go myself." She never received an answer beyond a polite reply that her concerns had been noted. But the silence didn't sit well with everyone. One man refused to let the story die. His name was Julian Moreno, a young journalist from New Mexico, and the younger brother of loaded Ana Moreno, the team's medic. He had looked up to Ana his whole life. She was his older sister, his protector, his inspiration. When she disappeared, the family was told she had been assigned to a field hospital near Pleiku. No mention of Echo 7. No mention of Laos. The stories didn't add up. Julian started digging, not because he suspected a cover-up, but because he needed peace. The more he searched, the more questions surfaced. First came the timeline. Army records showed Ana leaving Vietnam in late August 1969. But another file, one Julian only found through a Freedom of Information Act request, listed her participation in a joint field operation in early September. How could she be listed in 2 places at once? Then came the names. In an obscure after-action report from a support unit near the Cambodian border, Julian found a passing reference to Echo 7 shadow team last seen near the Sekong River bend. That detail wasn't in any family report. In fact, the term Echo 7 didn't appear in any publicly released documentation. It was like the unit had been erased. Julian tracked down veterans who had served in Makfi Saugi. Most wouldn't talk. Some said they didn't remember. A few quietly admitted that they'd heard stories about a unit sent too far into the jungle, sent without backup, without recognition. They were ghosts, one former comms officer told him. Not officially part of anything, just a rumor with boots. More strange details emerged. In a declassified CIA memo from 1971, Julian found an indirect reference to American assets presumed lost during Echo Phase incursion, northern sector. There was no file number. No location, just a vague sentence buried between mentions of Soviet arms shipments and increased enemy surveillance along the Laotian corridor. Julian brought this document to a retired intelligence analyst who had worked in Vietnam. The man looked at it, shook his head slowly and said, "That wasn't meant to be found." Echo Phase wasn't a mission name, it was a signal code. That's how they kept things off the books. Julian reached out to the CIA for comment. He received a brief reply: "We can neither confirm nor deny the existence of the operation referenced." It was the same response the agency had given to other inquiries over the years: curt, impersonal, final. But for Julian, that denial was confirmation enough. As his investigation gained momentum, he published a series of articles under the title Ghosts of the Border War. They sparked quiet interest among veterans groups and investigative journalists, though mainstream outlets stayed away. Too vague, too buried, too dangerous. Still, Julian kept going. He compiled eyewitness reports from villagers near the Laotian border, who spoke of American spirits who lived in the hills and helped wounded locals. One older farmer claimed he once saw an American woman treating a boy with a fever, then disappear into the trees. When he showed Julian the spot, they found rusted metal canteens marked with faded U.S. insignias. One was stamped A. Moreno. The pieces didn't form a complete picture, but something was clear. These soldiers didn't die in the jungle. Not at first. They survived something. They endured. And someone had tried very hard to erase their trail. But now, decades later, the trail was beginning to reappear. The deeper Julian dug, the more he realized this was not just a forgotten mission. It was a sacrifice buried under decades of silence. A decision made far above the heads of soldiers, far away from the jungle's heat and fear. A decision that left Echo 7 alone in the darkness. Their story wasn't just about what happened. It was about what was hidden, and why. And somewhere out there, behind declassified files and faded memories, the truth waited, buried but not gone. Long after the war had ended, and the maps were redrawn, the stories didn't stop. In the shadowy corners of villages near the old prison camps, deep in the central highlands of Vietnam and along the forgotten trails near Laos, people still whispered about the Americans who never left. They called them Bong Ma, which means ghosts, not because they were dead, but because they were seen, and then gone. Julian Moreno, still chasing the truth behind his sister Anna's disappearance, followed one such lead to a dusty village, not far from what used to be Camp 9, a remote prison site once run by North Vietnamese military intelligence. The war had ended decades earlier, but when Julian asked about American prisoners, a few elders exchanged glances. One finally agreed to talk. The old man's name was Dao Min. He had been a farmer, never a soldier, but he remembered strange things. "There was a night," Dao said quietly, "a long time ago, after the Americans had surrendered Saigon. I heard noises near the edge of the rice fields. I went out with my lantern. I thought maybe animals had broken through the fence. But when I looked, I saw 3 figures tall, moving quickly. I hid behind a tree. One of them turned. I saw his face. Not Vietnamese, white skin, a beard. He was carrying food. They passed rice and medicine through the broken wall of the prison, and then they were gone before sunrise." Julian leaned forward. "Were they soldiers?" Dane nodded slowly. "They wore parts of uniforms, torn sleeves, old boots, not like your army now. But their eyes, they weren't dead, they were hiding." Similar accounts surfaced the more Julian asked. A former Viet Cong nurse recalled treating a wounded prisoner in the late 1970s, who spoke of a secret American unit that lived in the jungle and raided the camps at night, breaking locks, leaving supplies, even smuggling out a few captives. None of it was officially recorded, but in the memories of those who saw or heard about it, the Ghost Squad wasn't a myth. It was real, and it had become something more than just a lost patrol. Even former enemy soldiers began to speak. In a cramped apartment in Hanoi, Julian met Nguyen Bao, a retired North Vietnamese intelligence officer who had defected in the late 90s. He agreed to speak under the condition of anonymity at first, but later changed his mind. "They deserve to be known," he said. "Even if we were enemies, they were men of honor." Nguyen had served in the division that oversaw covert detention facilities, where captured American operatives were sent, not to regular camps but to invisible ones, that officially didn't exist. He said the goal was simple: break them, turn them, use them. There were 6 Americans brought to Camp 9 in late 1969, he told Julian. They were different, quiet, strong. They were offered deals, freedom in exchange for cooperation. One even had medical training. Your sister, I think, but none of them agreed. Not once. Julian froze. "You're sure about the number?" 6, Nguyen said firmly. 2 were injured. 1 was barely able to walk, but they stayed together. They spoke little. The guards called them vanishing, trung, war ghosts, because they never broke, even when others did. Yin paused, then added something else. There was a rumor among the staff that these 6 were not just prisoners. They had turned the prison into something else, something dangerous. Guards grew afraid. Keys went missing. Medicine disappeared from the storage rooms. Some prisoners were found outside their cells in the morning. No one ever admitted how, but we all knew. The deeper Julian went, the more disturbing the pattern became. Former American POWs, long repatriated, spoke of hearing rumors while in captivity. They never saw the ghost squad themselves, but some swore the name was whispered by guards in hushed tones. They feared them. One ex-POW said, they talked about how there was a group of Americans who couldn't be broken, who helped others survive without ever being seen. One man, Major Glenn Walker, had spent nearly 5 years in a jungle prison near the Cambodian border. He was released in 1973, but what he remembered most wasn't his own story. It was the others. There were nights when the guards would disappear from their posts, Walker said. Sometimes we'd wake up and find extra food where there hadn't been any, or a map. One guy found wire cutters next to his bed. When we asked the guards about it, they said nothing, just looked nervous. It wasn't our people doing it. Someone else was inside that prison system, watching, help. Julian began to piece together the impossible timeline. Echo 7 hadn't died in the jungle. Not right away. They had been captured, isolated, and yet somehow they had endured. Not just endured, but fought back in the most unlikely way. The legend had grown not because someone made it up, but because too many people had seen too many things that couldn't be explained. A woman in uniform disappearing into the night. A bearded man sneaking rice into locked camps. Footprints where none should be. Prison guards who quit their post without explanation. A ghost squad that lived in the shadows not to haunt but to resist. To this day, villagers near the old prison sites light candles for those 6 unknown soldiers. Not as enemies, not even as ghosts, but as protectors. Julian stared at his growing stack of notes, photos, voice recordings, and declassified scraps. The story he was uncovering wasn't just about loss, it was about defiance, about honor that didn't fade, even when forgotten. And the world had no idea it had ever happened. It began with a satellite image, not even meant for military use, just part of a global environmental scan, funded by a humanitarian agency tracking deforestation along the Vietnamese-Lao border. But what caught the analyst's eye wasn't trees, it was geometry. Straight lines, too clean, a rectangular grid, faded under decades of jungle growth. At first it was dismissed, but someone in the Department of Defense noticed the coordinates overlapped with a redacted area from old MAC-VOSOG maps, a place where missions went dark, where American boots vanished without a trace. Quietly, a team was dispatched, not soldiers but civilian aid workers with permission from the Vietnamese government, to conduct post-war humanitarian assessments. When they reached the site, they didn't find buildings, not anymore. The jungle had reclaimed most of it. But what remained told a different story. Rusted fencing buried under vines, concrete posts, pieces of rope fused with tree roots. Most chilling of all, 6 small clearings, each marked with flat stones. On one of them, someone had carved with something sharp. Voss, no traitor. It was the first time Captain Franklin Voss's name had been seen since 1969. Julian Moreno, who had now spent nearly 7 years chasing shadows, flew out as soon as he saw the photos. The Vietnamese officials were cautious but didn't interfere. Whatever had been there, it was long gone. Officially, they had no records of any facility at that location. Unofficially, no one dared go near it. The locals called it Ridding, Konkuru, the jungle that never forgets. Among the debris, Julian found something else. A rusted medical kit with faded markings. Inside, beneath a broken vial, was a small brass locket. Inside it, his sister Anna's photo. Cracked, smudged, but real. That discovery triggered the next chapter of the story. One told not through reports or rumors, but through recovered pieces, survivors' accounts, and finally a reconstructed timeline. Fall 1969. Deep jungle. Unknown location. After Echo 7's last transmission, Ghost Squad advancing to Phase 3, the team was intercepted, not in a firefight, not with bullets, but ambushed in silence. A trap set by NVA special units, tipped off by a Soviet-trained counterintelligence team monitoring U.S. jungle frequencies. The squad was captured near the border and immediately separated from any POW channels. They weren't taken to Hanoi. They weren't registered. They were off the books, vanished. They were brought to a hidden prison camp built not for mass captivity but for one purpose: to extract secrets. Captain Voss, always composed, kept morale steady at first. He told his team it was temporary, that they'd be found. But days turned to weeks, then months. Food was scarce. Sleep was controlled. Guards never spoke to them directly. Instead, recorded messages played in English filled with lies. America has forgotten you. Your families believe you're dead. Help us and you can go home. Lieutenant Anna Moreno was kept isolated. They knew she had medical knowledge. She was offered her release if she agreed to assist them. She refused, twice. Then they made her watch the others suffer. She still refused. Sergeant Leo Calder, the demolitions expert, had his hands bound for weeks, preventing him from even lifting a spoon. Corporal Thomas Yazzie, the tracker, was forced to walk blindfolded for hours in twisted loops to break his sense of direction. Colonel Novak, the sniper, was kept in darkness, no light for 30 days. But none of them talked. One night, Sergeant Rourke, the communications tech, managed to steal a piece of sharpened bamboo and carved a message into the inside wall of the latrine. Still together, still fighting. The guards found it. Rourke was taken. For days he didn't return. When he did, he limped, but he smiled. They can't break what they don't understand, he whispered to Novak. Over time, something remarkable happened. The team, despite starvation, illness, and exhaustion, began turning the prison on itself. They memorized guard shifts. They passed coded signals using loose gravel. They shared what little they had: scraps of food, sips of water, whispered stories from home. Even when offered the chance to defect to survive, they stood firm. Then came the final blow. In March of 1970, a Soviet advisor arrived at the camp. According to Nguyen Bao, the defector Julian had interviewed in Hanoi, the advisor wanted to extract not just information but cooperation. He offered the team roles as double agents: money, safety, a way out. Captain Voss, barely able to stand, asked only one question: "Can I speak freely?" The advisor nodded. Voss looked him in the eye and said, "Tell your generals we die Americans." After that, the privileges stopped. They were moved to a separate enclosure, isolated, forgotten. Over the next 6 months, one by one, they faded from the records. No burial logs, no dates of death, just silence. Until that carving appeared on the stone, decades later. Voss, no traitor. No one knows who carved it. Locals swear the site was untouched for years. Maybe it was one of them, just before the end. Maybe it was someone they helped escape, a POW who came back. Or maybe it was a message to the world, a warning, a tribute. Julian returned home with photos, field notes, the locket, and a heavy silence in his chest. He didn't cry. He didn't publish right away. He just sat with the truth. The jungle didn't take them. The war didn't break them. The world just forgot them. But they were never lost. Not really. The Ghost Squad didn't vanish because they were defeated. They vanished because they refused to betray what they stood for, even when no one was watching. And now, finally, someone was. By the second winter in captivity, the prison deep in the jungle had changed. Not its layout, not the conditions, but the way the guards looked at their prisoners. What was once silent contempt had turned into unease. Because even after everything, starvation, isolation, false hope, the 6 Americans still hadn't broken. The interrogations grew more creative. They no longer used force in the obvious ways. Instead, they dangled freedom like bait. For Leo Calder, the demolitions expert, they brought in documents, photographs, a birth certificate forged to show he was defecting under witness protection, a passport with his name misspelled just enough to irritate him. They slid it across the table and said, "Just sign. You can go home. You'll even get paid." Leo stared at the paper, ran a finger down the name printed at the bottom, and then slowly rolled it into a tight coil. Without a word, he struck a match on the underside of the metal chair and let the flames take the lies. They didn't offer it again. Specialist Carl Novak, the sniper from Indiana, was different, quiet. He hadn't spoken more than a few words in weeks. When they pulled him in, they tried a new tactic: play recordings of family voices. But Novak knew better. His mother's accent was wrong. His sister never called him Carl, and when the questioning began, he turned his back to the interrogator. They yelled, they threatened. Finally, one of them stepped forward with a needle. Novak looked up and bit down hard on his tongue, drawing just enough damage to stop himself from speaking for days. He spent the next week in a dark cell, mouthing words into the air, practicing silence. Meanwhile, Thomas Yazzie, the Navajo tracker, had found his own way to resist. He was given brief tasks in the supply sheds, stacking boxes, organizing tools under guard. One day he slipped a small piece of chalk into his bag. The next, he began leaving markings behind wooden planks, under benches carved into the soft clay bricks of the latrine wall. At first, just initials, then short messages. E7, holding, still 6, trust no one. The guards never noticed, but Yazzie knew someday, someone might. And when they did, they'd know the Ghost Squad never gave up. Anna Moreno had been tested from the start. As a medic, they saw her as the most useful. They gave her wounded NVA soldiers to treat. They told her saving them would earn her comfort, extra food, even release. Anna never refused the care that would have drawn suspicion, but she adjusted the dosages, added moldy cloth to the bandages, kept water just a little too warm to reduce effectiveness. She was careful, surgical. One of the guards, young, unsure, started sneaking her supplies, antibiotics, painkillers. He believed she was loyal. Anna never used the supplies on the enemy. She hid them, rationed them, used them on her own team. In the quiet moments, she'd sit beside Captain Voss, who by now could barely walk without assistance. His ribs stuck out. His face was pale, sunken, but his mind was sharp. They'll try again soon, he'd whisper. Don't let them get to Rourke. Sergeant James Rourke, the communications tech, had become the key. The enemy knew he had the knowledge to disrupt or hijack U.S. radio signals. They offered him a transmitter. Just show us how it works, they said. We'll let you send a message home. Rourke asked for time. He told them he needed to test the battery. They watched as he tapped wires together, adjusted the frequency dial, checked the antenna. What they didn't see was how he redirected the internal wiring, reversing polarity and short-circuiting the emitter. Instead of testing their network, he was building a one-shot transmitter. The plan came together in pieces, spoken in whispers during guard rotations, drawn in chalk beneath the sleeping mats. Yazzie mapped the courtyard in scale. Novak watched the stars and predicted weather pattern. Calder used stolen scraps of tin to build a small distraction device. No flames, just smoke and sound. Anna timed the guards' patrols, and Rourke, with Voss's help, set the schedule. It had to happen during monsoon season. Heavy rain meant low visibility. They waited 2 weeks for the perfect storm. On the night of the escape, they struck. Calder set the distraction near the eastern fence. A loud pop echoed, followed by thick white smoke made from powdered soap, oil, and dried fungus. The guards panicked. Most rushed to the perimeter. Inside the hut, Rourke connected the final wires. The device buzzed to life. He held down the trigger and spoke in coded bursts. E7, alive, coordinates unknown. Send search. Repeat. E7, alive. The signal lasted only 10 seconds before the power gave out, but it was enough. They made their move through the western wall. Yazzie had loosened a panel weeks earlier, but the mud was deeper than expected. Novak got stuck. Anna pulled him free, but in the struggle a guard spotted them. The alarm blared. They didn't make it out. The guards recaptured them before sunrise, but the signal had traveled. Months later, a U.S. recon aircraft flying over Laos picked up a burst of static, followed by a frequency echo, matching an American field code from 1969. The team was never told what it meant. No rescue came, but somewhere, someone logged it. Somewhere, a file was created, and decades later Julian Moreno found it. In the years that followed, the Ghost Squad was split again. Some placed in solitary, others moved to different camps. Eventually their trail went cold, but their resistance never died. Anna's locket, Yazzie's carvings, Calder's burned papers, Novak's silence, Rourke's signal, Voss's message on the stone. They may have been broken in body, but not in will. They held the line not on a battlefield but behind walls of bamboo and wire, and in doing so, they preserved something no prison could take: honor. Their story didn't end in that jungle. It lived on in the rumors, in the whispers, in the ghost stories told by villagers who swore they saw shadowy figures walking the trails at night, guarding something sacred. Not haunting, protecting. The months of imprisonment had taken a toll on every member of the ghost squad, but their spirits remained unbroken. Deep inside the hidden prison, beyond the grasp of the outside world, the 6 American soldiers faced a final, unbearable test. One day, the prison commandant summoned Captain Franklin Voss, Anna Moreno, Leo Calder, Carl Novak, Thomas Yazzie, and James Rourke into a small windowless room. The air was heavy with the smell of damp stone and faded hope. The commandant's voice was cold but calm. "We offer you a choice. Work for us. Become agents. Use your skills to betray your country. Help us find others like you." He paused, eyes scanning each face. "Or face the consequences." The threat was clear but unspoken. Refusal meant death. They sat in silence, the weight of the choice pressed down on them like the jungle canopy outside the prison walls. It was Leo who broke the quiet. His voice was steady, firm. "We will not betray what we believe in, no matter the cost." Carl nodded slowly, his eyes hard. "They can take our lives, but they will never own our loyalty." Thomas traced a design in the dirt, a symbol from his Navajo heritage. It meant strength, resilience, and spirit. "Our people never surrender." Anna, despite exhaustion, met their gaze. "We promised to protect each other. We keep that promise now." Rourke looked at the others, then down at his trembling hands. "If they want us to talk, they'll have to take more than words." Captain Voss stood last, his face pale but resolute. "We are soldiers, not traitors. If this is our end, then we make it on our terms." The decision was made. In the days that followed, they prepared. They gathered what little they could, scraps of cloth torn from worn uniforms, bits of charcoal, and a discarded water jug. With trembling fingers they wrote their final messages. Words of hope, defiance, love, and apology to families who might never know the full story. These messages were folded carefully and hidden deep inside the water jug, which they buried beneath the floor of their prison hut, a silent testament that their story would not vanish. Their last night was quiet. No prayers, no farewells, only the shared understanding that what mattered was not how long they lived, but how they chose to live. Official records never mentioned that final act. The prison itself was later destroyed in an unexplained fire, and any documents that might have existed were lost or hidden in redacted archives. The only clue to their fate came years later, when a CIA asset operating in Southeast Asia intercepted a letter from an informant close to the prison's commanders. The letter hinted at an unrecorded execution. No witnesses, no bodies recovered, only silence where once there was hope. Within the highest military circles, the story of the Ghost Squad became a quiet legend. They were heroes who vanished without trace, who faced death without compromise, who chose honor over life itself. Their sacrifice was never publicized, never acknowledged in official ceremonies, but it shaped the way future missions were planned and the way prisoners were handled. And deep down their families and comrades felt the weight of their bravery, an unspoken bond that time and distance could never erase. Julian Moreno, Anna's younger brother, had uncovered the truth piece by piece. He had seen the carved messages, found the coded radio signals, and pieced together the final letters hidden under the jungle floor. When he finally held the water jug in his hands, he understood. The Ghost Squad had not been lost to the jungle. They had become its silent guardians. Their story, once whispered and half forgotten, was now a beacon. A reminder that courage could shine brightest in the darkest places and that some sacrifices, though unseen, echo forever. The years after the war had passed slowly, but Julian Moreno never stopped searching. The younger brother of lead in Anna Moreno had grown from a curious, determined journalist into a man obsessed with uncovering the truth about the Ghost Squad. Their story, whispered in fragments for decades, had become a puzzle he was determined to solve. In the early 1990s, the political climate shifted. With the Cold War easing, some classified files began to surface. Journalists and researchers gained limited access to CIA archives, though many pages were still blacked out or heavily redacted. Julian knew the key to the truth was hidden somewhere in those shadows. He spent months sifting through records, interviewing former soldiers, and connecting scattered clues. He followed coordinates noted in declassified operation reports, cross-referencing them with satellite images and local Vietnamese accounts. Each piece of information built a map, pointing closer to the forgotten jungle prison where the Ghost Squad had vanished. His breakthrough came when he was granted rare permission to review a collection of old photographs gathered from former Vietnamese prisoners of war. Among the faded, torn images was a haunting picture of Sergeant James Rourke, young, defiant, and captured. His eyes stared straight into the camera, holding a quiet strength that told 1,000 stories of endurance and courage. This photo was the first concrete proof that the Ghost Squad had been held prisoner and had not simply disappeared without trace. It confirmed the stories that had been passed down in whispers, rumors, and partial memories. Around the same time, the Pentagon quietly declassified partial files acknowledging the existence of Recon Unit Echo 7, the Ghost Squad. The documents admitted that the team had been sent on a highly secretive mission near the Laotian border, but that they were never recovered. The files remained vague on many details, and no official cause of their loss was provided. Still, this was a monumental shift from years of silence and denial. Julian held on to the photo of Sergeant Rourke, the faded letters from the water jug, and the fragments of reports like a sacred collection. He reached out to the families of the missing soldiers, sharing what he had learned, and slowly, a quiet healing began. On a crisp autumn day in Arlington National Cemetery, a memorial ceremony was held to honor the Ghost Squad. Although their names were still technically listed as unconfirmed deceased in military records, the ceremony acknowledged their bravery and sacrifice. Family members, former comrades, and military officials stood together, paying tribute to the silent heroes who had disappeared in the jungle decades ago. As the flag was lowered and taps played softly, those gathered felt the weight of the past lifting. If only a little. The Ghost Squad's story, once a ghostly legend whispered in the jungle shadows, was finally recognized in the light of day. Julian stood quietly, holding his sister's photo close, knowing that the truth had finally come home. The soldiers who chose silence and sacrifice had been heard at last. Years after the Ghost Squad's secret mission faded into the shadows of history, their story began to take on a life of its own, not just as a mystery or a forgotten chapter of the Vietnam War, but as a lasting symbol of sacrifice, loyalty, and the hidden toll of war. Veterans who had served in Vietnam, especially those who had been part of covert operations or recon teams, often spoke quietly about Echo 7, the Ghost Squad. To them, these soldiers were more than just a lost unit. They were a reminder of the dangers faced by those sent far beyond the front lines, working in silence, unseen and recognized. "I never knew them personally," said one retired soldier now in his 70s, "but their story was always something we respected. They showed us what it means to hold on to your honor, no matter what, even when the world forgot them." Historians studying the Vietnam War and special operations missions started to dig deeper into classified archives, piecing together details of Echo 7's assignments and struggles. Their research highlighted the ethical questions surrounding secret missions, how soldiers were sent on impossible tasks, with little support, often denied recognition or even acknowledgement of their fate. One military ethicist explained, "The Ghost Squad story forced us to rethink how we treat soldiers involved in covert operations. Their sacrifices aren't always visible in the public eye, but that doesn't make them any less real. It's a lesson about transparency, responsibility, and honoring those who serve in the shadows." Families of the Ghost Squad members, once left in painful uncertainty, found a measure of peace as the truth emerged. The discovery of Anna Marino's letters, the photos of Sergeant Rourke, and the recovered artifacts brought closure to those who had waited decades for answers. Julian Moreno, Anna's brother, continued to advocate for official recognition of the squad's sacrifice. "Their courage was quiet but powerful," he said in a recent interview. "We owe it to them, and to every soldier who faces the unknown, to remember their stories honestly and with respect." Please. Today, Echo 7's legacy lives on quietly but strongly. Their story has inspired changes in military policy. New guidelines emphasize the importance of recognizing the service and sacrifices of soldiers involved in secret operations, and efforts have been made to improve communication with families of missing personnel. Yet, even with all the research, ceremonies, and acknowledgments, some pieces of the story remain hidden in the jungle silence. On a humid morning near the Vietnamese-Laotian border, an old jungle vine swayed gently in the breeze. Hanging from its weathered tendrils was a rusted dog tag, half buried in moss and earth. The metal was worn, the letters nearly faded, but its presence was a silent testament. It had once belonged to a soldier who had vanished decades ago, one of the Ghost Squad. Time might try to claim it, covering it in vines and dust, but history could not forget. The dog tag hung there, a quiet reminder that some stories never truly end. They echo through the trees, through the whispers of the jungle, through the hearts of those who remember. The Ghost Squad's mission, their courage, and their sacrifice live on, not just as an urban legend, but as a powerful truth etched into the very fabric of American history. If you're a proud American who honors the courage of our war heroes, hit that subscribe button. There are more true stories of bravery and sacrifice waiting for you.